He had only 24 hours to find a wife, or lose the fortune he spent a lifetime building. But in the middle of desperation, a humble young woman appears and someone he never thought he'd cross paths with. Yet there's a devastating secret in the past. If this story got your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. San Francisco breathed money and ambition. In the financial epicenter of the country's largest tech metropolis, among mirrored glass buildings of the financial district and the ceaseless movement of executives and speculators, Adrian Bennett reigned like a modern emperor. At 38, he commanded an empire that stretched from agribusiness to technology, from mining companies to real estate investments. His name echoed on stock exchanges, in the pages of economic journals, in the corridors of power. A man made of ice and ambition, shaped by early losses and family betrayals that taught him a cruel lesson. Feelings are luxuries that powerful men cannot afford. Orphaned at 12, when his parents died in a plane crash, he was raised by his paternal grandfather Henry Bennett, a ruthless patriarch who saw emotions as signs of weakness. "Love is distraction, Adrian. Power is eternal," the old man repeated every night, molding his grandson in his image. And Adrian had learned the lesson well. His relationships were transactions, his conquests, strategies, his heart, a cold storage chamber where nothing flourished. Until that Tuesday morning, when the family lawyers gathered in the mahogany office for the reading of the recently deceased patriarch's will, Adrian expected formalities, the natural transfer of a patrimony he had been managing for years, but the universe had reserved a bitter irony. Dr. Castellano, the family lawyer for 3 decades, cleared his throat and read a clause that no one knew about, hidden in the last pages of the document. "I leave my fortune and total control of the companies to my grandson Adrian Bennett, under one condition. He must be married and establish a legitimate family within 24 hours from this reading. Otherwise, all assets will be transferred to the Hope Foundation, administered by the Taylor and Associates Consortium." The silence in the room was deafening. Adrian felt the blood freeze in his veins. Taylor and Associates were his biggest rivals, men who had been trying to destroy his empire for years. And the old man, even in death, had managed to set a perfect trap. 24 hours, an impossible deadline for a man who had transformed solitude into a life philosophy. In the first moments, Adrian tried to solve the situation as he always did, with money. He called contract marriage agencies, looked for ex-girlfriends willing to make a millionaire deal, offered astronomical sums to any woman willing to sign a paper. But each attempt failed humiliatingly. Some wanted more money than he could offer without arousing suspicion. Others had obvious ulterior motives, and some simply took pleasure in seeing him beg, he who had never bowed before anyone. As the hours flowed like sand between his fingers, Adrian drove through the streets of San Francisco in his black Porsche, his mind boiling in search of a solution. That's when fate decided to intervene in an unexpected way. On one of the streets in Chinatown, he almost ran over a young woman carrying a box of flowers who stumbled right in front of him. Emma Mitchell was 23 and carried much more weight on her shoulders than she should. Daughter of Italian immigrants who arrived in America dreaming of prosperity, she had inherited only debts, responsibilities, and a decaying flower shop in the city center. Her parents had died in an accident when she was 16, leaving her responsible for her ailing mother, who suffered from Alzheimer's, and for 2 15-year-old twin brothers. Her life was a succession of silent sacrifices, hard work, and dreams kept in poetry notebooks she wrote during sleepless nights. That morning, Emma was returning from the flower market with a load of roses for a wedding when the heel of her sandal broke. She lost her balance and the box flew from her hands, scattering red petals across the sidewalk like drops of blood on the asphalt. The Porsche braked just inches from her, and Adrian got out of the car with his heart racing, not from the adrenaline of the near accident, but from the vision of the young woman kneeling on the ground, collecting the flowers with tears in her eyes. She was beautiful in a way he had never experienced, not the artificial beauty of women in his social circle. shaped by plastic surgeons and professional makeup artists, Emma possessed a natural, serene, almost wild beauty. Wavy brown hair escaping from her ponytail, honey-colored eyes that reflected a mixture of strength and vulnerability, and a mouth that seemed sculpted to whisper poetry. When she looked up and stared at him, Adrian felt something move inside him, something he believed had been dead for a long time. "I'm sorry," Emma murmured, still picking up the flowers. "I didn't see you coming. I hope I didn't scratch your car?" The simplicity of her concern disconcerted him. Anyone else would try to extract money from the situation, forge non-existent injuries, call lawyers. But Emma was only concerned about a scratch that didn't even exist. Adrian crouched down, helping her collect the roses, and when their hands touched by chance, an electric current ran through his entire body. That's when the idea came to him. Crazy, impossible, but perhaps the only way out. He observed Emma with new eyes, evaluating not only her beauty but her character, her natural honesty, the strength that emanated from her despite her apparent fragility, and he made a decision. That would forever change the fate of both. "I need your help," said Adrian, still crouched beside Emma, collecting the last roses scattered on the ground. The words left his mouth before he could fully process what he was about to propose. "And you need mine." Emma raised her eyes, confused. The man in front of her was clearly from another world. The impeccable Italian suit, the watch that probably cost more than she earned in a year, the expensive perfume that mixed woody notes with something indefinably masculine. But there was something in his dark eyes, an urgency she couldn't decipher, that made her stay there listening. "I don't understand," she murmured, getting up and dusting off her simple dress. "How can you need my help? We don't even know each other." Adrian stood up too, all his imposing 6'1" manifesting. For the first time in years he felt nervous. There was no time for elaborate strategies, for psychological games or subtle manipulations. He had only 14 hours left, and before him was perhaps his only chance not to lose everything he had fought for his entire life. "I know this will sound insane," he began, running a hand through his dark hair, "but I need to get married. Today? And you need money to take care of your family." Emma blinked, certain she had misheard. "How do you know about my family?" "I don't," admitted Adrian, "but I can see. The work-calloused hands, the dress that's been altered more than once, the care with each rose as if it were too precious to waste. You carry the world on your shoulders, don't you?" The accuracy of the observation hit her like a punch. Emma felt tears threatening to well up again. That was exactly it. She had carried the world on her shoulders since she was 16, when she found herself responsible for people she loved more than her own life. Her mother, who sometimes didn't even recognize her, lost in the fog of Alzheimer's. The twin brothers, Jake and Peter, who were still studying and depended on her for everything. The flower shop that barely paid the bills, the accumulating debts, the late rent, the expensive medications. "You're crazy," she said, taking a step back. "I don't know what kind of joke this is, but—" $50 million, interrupted Adrian. "I'll deposit 25 in your account today before the wedding. The other 25 in a month. Enough to pay off all your debts, treat your mother in the best clinic in the country, secure your brother's future, and still have enough left for you to start over." Emma felt the world spin. $50 million. Such an absurd amount that her brain refused to process it. "This is impossible. Nobody pays that much for a fake marriage." "It wouldn't be fake," said Adrian, and there was something in his voice that made her shiver. "It would be real, on paper, before the law, just temporary. A year at most, after that friendly divorce, and each goes their own way." "But why?" Emma shook her head, still trying to understand. "Why me? Why not one of those socialites who must be dying to marry you?" Adrian hesitated. How to explain that he had tried exactly that and failed miserably? How to tell that all the women in his social circle were as calculating as he was, and that none had accepted a contract without trying to renegotiate impossible terms? How to admit that there was something about her, in those honest eyes and that silent strength, that reassured him in a way he didn't understand? "Because you're different," he said simply. "Because when I look at you, I don't see greed. I see need, yes, but also dignity, and because, he paused, surprising himself with his own honesty, because I trust you. Emma laughed, but it was a laugh without humor. You trust me? You don't even know my name. Emma Mitchell, said Adrian softly, and she widened her eyes. Daughter of Joseph and Maria Mitchell, owners of Bella Vista Florist on Aurora Street. You're 23, lost your parents at 16, take care of your mother Antonia, and the twin brothers Jake and Peter. You study literature at San Francisco State University, night classes and write poetry in your spare time. Emma's blood froze. How do you know all that? I have resources, replied Adrian. The truth was that he had sent his assistant to quickly investigate while she collected the flowers, a basic background check that was standard procedure in any important negotiation. But seeing her frightened made him feel guilty, a strange emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Look, he said, softening his tone, I know this is crazy. I know I'm a complete stranger making an absurd proposal, but I don't have time or options, and you have a family. That needs help. We can help each other. Emma looked at the roses in her hands, then at the man in front of her. $50 million. It was enough money to solve all her problems, to give her family a dignified life, to fulfill dreams she didn't even dare to dream. But there was something in the depths of his dark eyes that frightened her. It wasn't malice or cruelty, but an intensity that promised complications she couldn't foresee. And if I say no? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Adrian smiled, but it was a melancholy smile. Then I'll lose everything I've worked for my entire life, and you'll continue carrying the world on your shoulders until you can't take it anymore. VK. Silence stretched between them, heavy with possibilities and consequences. Emma felt her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Her rational mind screamed that this was dangerous, that men like him didn't make generous offers without expecting something in return. But when she thought about her mother wasting away at home, her brothers who deserved a better future, the flower shop that was one step away from bankruptcy, her resistance crumbled. How much time do I have to decide? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. 10 minutes, replied Adrian. The clerk's office closes at 5 and we still need to arrange documents, witnesses, a judge who agrees to perform the ceremony today. If you say yes, it needs to be now. Emma closed her eyes, and for a moment Adrian was sure she would say no. When she opened them again, there was an iron determination in her gaze that surprised him. Then yes, she said, her voice firm, despite her trembling hands. But on one condition. I want a written contract with all clauses clear, and if you try to deceive me or do anything I haven't agreed to, I disappear with the money, and you'll never see me again. For the first time in 24 hours, Adrian smiled genuinely. He had chosen well. The next 4 hours passed like a hurricane. Adrian mobilized his most influential contacts, called in favors accumulated over years, moved bureaucratic mountains to arrange a civil ceremony on the same day. Emma, still in a state of shock, was taken to a boutique on Union Square where a salesperson, terrified by the urgency, chose a simple but elegant white dress, matching shoes, and a white gold wedding band that cost more than she earned in 6 months. The wedding took place at the City Hall at 4:45 in the afternoon. A private judge, clearly bribed to stay beyond hours, conducted a quick and perfunctory ceremony. The witnesses were Adrian's driver and a Clark employee. Emma held a small bouquet of white roses, the only ones that remained intact from the morning accident, and tried not to think about the absurdity of the situation. When the judge pronounced the words husband and wife, and Adrian leaned in to kiss her as the protocol required, Emma felt an electric shock run through her entire body. It was just a chaste kiss, a quick peck to fulfill the formality. But his lips were softer than she expected, and his masculine scent enveloped her like an intoxicating mist. For a moment, she forgot that this was just a contract. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if it were real. When they separated, Adrian also seemed disconcerted. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her blush, and she had the strange feeling that he too had felt something unexpected in that simple touch. Done, said the judge, stamping the documents. You are now legally married. Congratulations to the newlyweds. The irony of the words didn't go unnoticed. Adrian and Emma looked at each other, both aware that they had just taken a step that couldn't be easily undone. They were strangers who signed a paper, but before the law they were husband and wife. In the car during the journey to Adrian's penthouse in Pacific Heights, the silence was awkward. Emma looked out the window at the streets of San Francisco, trying to process the speed at which her life had changed in a few hours. That morning, she was an indebted florist. Now, she was the wife of one of the richest men in the country. You'll need to live with me for the next 30 days, Adrian finally said, breaking the silence. It's part of the clauses in the will. We need to prove the marriage is legitimate. Live with you, Emma turned to face him. That wasn't in the agreement. It is now, he replied, but his tone wasn't arrogant. It was almost apologetic. I know it's not ideal, but we have to be convincing. There will be investigations, auditors, people trying to prove our marriage is a farce. Emma felt her stomach tighten. Reality was revealing itself to be more complicated by the minute. And my family? My mother needs constant care. My brothers? I've already arranged private caregivers for your mother, interrupted Adrian. The best nurses in San Francisco. And your brothers can continue at school normally. My driver will pick them up and take them every day. The efficiency with which he had organized her life impressed and frightened her at the same time. You did all this without consulting me. I did what was necessary to honor our bargain, he replied. You accepted the money. Now you need to fulfill your part. The coldness in his voice hit her like a slap. For a few moments during the ceremony and the kiss, Emma had forgotten that this was just a business transaction. The reminder brought her back to reality with cruel force. The private elevator to the penthouse went up 25 floors in silence. When the doors opened, Emma had to suppress a gasp. The apartment was a suspended palace. Glass windows offered a 360-degree view of the city. Italian designer furniture occupied spacious, minimalist areas, and there were works of art on the walls that she only knew from books. Your room is in this wing, said Adrian, leading her down. A wide hallway. It has a private bathroom, closet, and access to the veranda. My room is in the opposite wing. Emma noted the relief in her own voice when she learned they would sleep separately. His physical proximity made her nervous in a way she couldn't explain. There was something in the way he moved, in the intensity of his gaze, in the way he occupied space, that awakened sensations she preferred not to analyze. The room assigned to her was larger than the entire house where she lived with her family. The king-size bed was covered with what seemed like silk sheets. There was a reading armchair by the window, and a desk where she could write her poetry. It was a luxury she had never imagined experiencing. There are clothes in the closet, said Adrian, standing at the door. I had some pieces bought in your size. How do you know my size? Asked Emma, and immediately regretted the question when she saw his gaze travel over her body almost imperceptibly. Professional estimate, he replied, but there was something in his voice that made her blush. When Adrian left, Emma threw herself on the bed and buried her face in her hands. What had she done? What kind of situation had she gotten herself into? The money was already in her account. She had checked on her cell phone during the journey, but suddenly the 50 million seemed insufficient to compensate for the feeling of being lost in a world she didn't understand. In the opposite wing of the apartment, Adrian poured himself a whiskey and observed the city through the window. He had achieved what he wanted. He was married, the will would be fulfilled, his empire was secure. So why did he feel so restless? The image of Emma in the white dress, with her almond eyes wide and her lips parted during the kiss, wouldn't leave his mind. There was something about her that destabilized him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps it was the innocence, or the way she looked at him without fear, or simply the fact that she was the first woman in his life who wanted nothing from him beyond the money they had agreed upon. But there were rules, limits. This was a contract, not a fairy tale. He couldn't allow himself to feel anything beyond gratitude for the practical solution she represented. He couldn't allow himself to desire more than the established terms. The problem was that, when he first saw her collecting roses on the sidewalk, when he smelled the soft perfume of her hair during the kiss, when he observed the silent strength in her gestures, something within him had awakened. Something he believed was dead forever, and that was dangerous. More dangerous than any business rival or testamentary clause. Because Adrian Bennett had learned from a very young age that feelings were luxuries that men like him couldn't afford. But Emma Mitchell, with her simple beauty and her transparent soul, was threatening to tear down all the walls he had built around his heart. On the first night of a marriage that was supposed to be just paper, two strangers found themselves closer than they had ever been to any other person, and more frightened than they would like to admit. The first days of cohabitation were a delicate dance of avoidance and inevitable proximity. Adrian left early for the office and returned late, immersing himself in work as a way to escape Emma's disturbing presence in his home. She, in turn, spent the mornings visiting her mother and brothers, and the afternoons cautiously exploring the spaces of the apartment, always careful not to invade his privacy. But it was impossible to completely ignore each other. There were casual moments that became charged with tension, when they crossed paths in the hallway and their bodies almost touched, when she prepared coffee in the gourmet kitchen and the aroma made him come down just for a glass of water, when he worked in the living room and heard the soft sound of her humming while reading on the veranda. Emma discovered that Adrian was more complex than she had imagined. In the kitchen drawers, she found medication for insomnia. On the living room bookshelf, books of classical poetry with marked pages and notes in the margins. In his office, old photographs of a smiling boy next to parents who seemed to love him deeply. They were fragments of humanity that contradicted the cold image he cultivated. Adrian, in turn, observed Emma when he thought she wasn't looking. The way she cared for the plants on the veranda, with the same delicacy she showed with the flowers in the shop. How she wrote in a small notebook every night, lost in thoughts that transformed her face into pure poetry. How she spoke on the phone, with her brothers, her voice full of affection and maternal concern that touched him in an unexpected way. It was on the fifth night that the forced cohabitation transformed into something more dangerous. Emma had prepared dinner, an attempt to feel useful amid so much luxury, and left a plate for him in the kitchen. When Adrian arrived, he found homemade lasagna still warm with a simple note. "Thank you for everything, Emma." The simplicity of the gesture disconcerted him. No woman in his life had ever cooked for him without expecting something in return. But there was Emma, offering pure kindness without ulterior motives. He ate alone in the kitchen, savoring not only the food, but the strange sensation of being cared for. The next morning, he found Emma on the veranda, watering the plants she had brought from the flower shop so they wouldn't die. She wore a simple yellow cotton dress that enhanced the golden color of her skin, and her hair was tied in a messy bun that left some strands framing her face. The morning sun enveloped her like a halo, and Adrian stood at the door just observing, without the courage to interrupt the scene. "Good morning," said Emma when she saw him, without stopping watering the plants. "There's fresh coffee in the kitchen." "Thank you," he murmured, but didn't leave. "You always wake up so early?" "Since childhood," she replied, finally turning to face him. "My father used to say that mornings were the best time to talk to God." "Do you believe in God?" asked Adrian. Genuinely curious. Emma smiled, and her smile was like a punch to his stomach. "I believe there's something greater than us, something that sometimes conspires for the right people to meet at the right time." The phrase hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings that neither dared to explore. Adrian approached, as if attracted by a magnetic force, until he was just inches from her. He could smell the soft fragrance of her shampoo, see the small golden freckles on her cheeks, notice how her hands trembled slightly. "Emma," he began, his voice hoarser than intended. "Yes?" she whispered, raising her eyes to meet his. For a moment the world stopped. Adrian raised his hand, almost touching her face, almost yielding to the impulse to discover if her skin was as soft as it looked. But then he remembered the rules, the contracts, the walls he had built around his heart. He pulled back abruptly, as if she burned. "Nothing," he said, his voice cold again. "Just thank you for dinner last night." Emma blinked, confused by the sudden change in his behavior. "You're welcome." Adrian left the veranda as if fleeing from a fire, leaving Emma alone with her plants and the disturbing sensation that something important had almost happened between them. But the danger signs weren't coming just from inside the apartment. Ryan Taylor, the rival businessman who had coveted the Bennett empire for years, hadn't passively accepted Adrian's victory. He hired private investigators to discover everything about the Lightning marriage, certain he would find evidence of fraud that could reverse the will. In the most expensive law firm in San Francisco, Taylor met with his secret weapon, Isabella Winters, Adrian's ex-fiancée and heiress to a traditional San Francisco family, a beautiful, calculating and dangerously determined woman to recover what she considered her property. "He married a commoner," said Isabella, examining the photos that investigators had obtained of Emma. "A flower seller. This is obviously a marriage of convenience." "But we can't prove it," replied Taylor, frustrated. "They live together, appear in public as a couple. She even started attending some social events with him." Isabella smiled, but it was a smile without warmth. "Then let's create a situation where the truth comes to light. I'll approach Miss Emma Mitchell. I'll discover her secrets, her weaknesses, her insecurities. And when I'm done with her, Adrian will realize he made the biggest mistake of his life." Meanwhile, in the Pacific Heights apartment, Emma wrote in her diary before sleeping, trying to make sense of the confusing feelings that Adrian awakened in her. There were moments when he was gentle, almost affectionate, and she glimpsed the vulnerable man behind the cold mask. But then he pulled away, built walls, reminded her that this was just a contract. "What do you want from me, Adrian Bennett?" she wrote. "Why do you sometimes look at me as if I were the most precious thing in the world, and then act as if I were a piece of furniture in the living room?" She didn't know that, on the other side of the apartment, Adrian was also awake, drinking whiskey, and looking at the city lights, fighting against a desire that grew each day. She didn't know that he had read about her in investigators' reports, but that now he wanted to know her through intimate conversations, not cold files. She didn't know that the most powerful man in San Francisco was falling in love with her, and that this frightened Adrian more than any business threat he had ever faced. And mainly, neither of them knew that their families were connected by a dark secret from the past, a secret that, when discovered, would threaten to destroy not only the contract between them, but any chance of happiness they might build together. The second week of marriage brought a routine that was dangerously comfortable. Adrian started coming home earlier, always with a plausible excuse. Documents to sign, important calls he could make from the home office. Emma started cooking more frequently, discovering that she took pleasure in caring for someone who seemed to have spent his entire life being cared for only by employees. It was on a rainy Thursday that everything changed. Emma had gone to visit her mother and returned soaked after waiting 40 minutes for an Uber in the torrential rain. When she entered the apartment, she was shaking with cold and her hair was dripping water onto the marble floor. Adrian found her like this when he left his office to fetch a file. "My God, you're freezing," he said, instinctively approaching. "You'll get sick like this." "I'm fine," murmured Emma, but her lips were purple and she clearly wasn't fine. Without thinking twice, Adrian wrapped her in his arms, rubbing his hands on her back to warm her. Emma stiffened for a moment, then melted against his chest, seeking the warmth of the male body. She could feel the defined muscles under his dress shirt, the smell of his perfume mixed with something purely masculine that made her feel dizzy. "You need to take a hot shower," he said, his voice husky, from having her so close. "And change these wet clothes." "I know how to take care of myself," protested Emma, but her voice came out whispered and without conviction. "I know you do," replied Adrian, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "You've spent your entire life taking care of everyone. But now there's someone who can take care of you." The words hung between them, loaded with a meaning that went far beyond the contract. Emma raised her eyes and met his, dark and intense, studying her face as if he wanted to memorize every detail. The moment stretched, tense and full of dangerous possibilities. It was Emma who pulled back first, blushing and confused. I'll take that shower." Adrian watched her walk away, fighting against the impulse to follow her, to discover if she felt the same electric attraction that consumed him. Since she had entered his life, he couldn't concentrate on work, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop, imagining her in situations that went far beyond the terms of the contract. While Emma tried to compose herself in the hot shower, letting the water wash away not only the cold, but also the confusion that Adrian awakened in her. She didn't know. She was being observed from a distance. Isabella Winters had started the first phase of her plan, hiring photographers to document every movement of the couple, looking for inconsistencies, moments of coldness that could be used as evidence that the marriage was a farce. But the photos being taken showed exactly the opposite. Adrian and Emma in intimate moments on the veranda, him touching her face with tenderness, her laughing at something he had said, the two lost in conversations that seemed to absorb them completely. To any outside observer, they looked like a couple in love. This enraged Isabella even more. The next morning she executed the second phase of the plan, a casual visit to Emma's flower shop, pretending to be a customer interested in arrangements for an event. Emma was organizing roses when the woman entered. Isabella was everything she was not: tall, blonde, elegant in a way that screamed money and social class. She wore a Chanel dress, Hermes bag, and a confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege. "Good afternoon," said Isabella with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm looking for arrangements for a very special dinner. I heard you do unique work." "Of course," replied Emma, suspecting nothing. "What kind of event is it?" "A reconciliation dinner," said Isabella, carefully observing Emma's reactions. "You know how it is. Sometimes men make foolish mistakes, get married on impulse, but they always return to where they truly belong." Emma felt an inexplicable discomfort, but remained professional. "I understand. What colors do you prefer, ma'am?" "Red," said Isabella, approaching the counter. "The color of true passion. Tell me, do you believe in true love? Or do you think some people get married for other reasons?" The suggestive tone in her voice made Emma shiver. There was something in the way the woman observed her, as if she knew secrets that Emma didn't know. "I believe each person has their reasons," Emma replied carefully. Isabella laughed, a melodious and cruel sound. "How diplomatic. I bet you're the type of person who believes in fairy tales, Cinderella and the prince, isn't it?" "I don't understand what you mean, ma'am." "Of course you do," said Isabella, leaning over the counter. "You're Emma Mitchell, aren't you? The new Mrs. Bennet. What a romantic story. A humble florist who won the heart of the richest man in San Francisco." Emma's blood froze. How did this woman know who she was? "I'm Isabella Winters," continued the blonde, savoring each word. "Adrian's ex-fiancée, and I can guarantee you one thing. Men like him don't fall in love with girls like you. They use girls like you." "You're mistaken, ma'am," said Emma, trying to maintain her composure. "Am I?" Isabella took the cell phone from her purse and showed a photo. It was Adrian at a social event, just 3 months before. Next to him, Isabella herself, stunning in a golden dress, while he kissed her passionately. This photo was taken shortly before our temporary disagreement. "Adrian always comes back to me, dear, always." Emma felt the world spin. 3 months. Just 3 months before meeting her, Adrian was kissing that woman as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "He didn't tell you about me, did he?" continued Isabella cruelly. "About our 5 years together? About the wedding plans we had? About how he desperately sought me out before finding you?" "That's not true," whispered Emma, but her voice carried no conviction. "Oh, my dear naive girl," sighed Isabella. "You really believe that a man like Adrian Bennet would marry a flower seller for love? What an adorable story you've invented in your romantic little head." Emma clung to the counter, feeling her legs weaken. Everything she had interpreted as genuine interest, as growing affection, as mutual attraction, suddenly seemed a cruel illusion. Isabella's words echoed in her mind like hammer blows. "He's using you for some purpose," said Isabella, feigning compassion. "And when he no longer needs you, he'll discard you like he discards all his broken toys. The difference is that you, unlike me, don't have the financial or social structure to recover from the fall." "Please leave," murmured Emma, trying not to cry in front of the woman. "Of course," said Isabella, satisfied with the damage she had caused. "But think about what I said, and when Adrian gets tired of the game, when he comes crawling back to me as he always does, remember that I warned you." She left the flower shop like an elegant storm, leaving Emma alone with her doubts and broken heart. For the first time since signing the contract, Emma wondered if she hadn't made the biggest mistake of her life, and if everything she was feeling, for Adrian wasn't just a dangerous illusion that was about to destroy her. Emma returned to the apartment that night as a different person. Isabella's words had planted a poison that spread through her veins, contaminating every moment she had shared with Adrian, transforming every affectionate gesture into calculated manipulation. She locked herself in her room before he arrived, pretending to be asleep when she heard his footsteps in the hallway. Adrian noticed the change immediately. Emma, who in recent days had become more open, closer, now avoided him as if he were a contagious disease. She no longer cooked for him, no longer waited with fresh coffee in the kitchen, no longer smiled when they crossed paths in the hallways. It was as if a wall of ice had risen between them overnight. "Emma," he called her the next morning when he found her on the veranda mechanically tending to the plants. "Did something happen?" "No," she replied without raising her eyes. "Why would anything happen?" But there was a coldness in her voice that he had never heard before, a distance that alarmed him more than any business crisis. "You're different," he insisted, "since yesterday. If I did something—" "You didn't do anything," she interrupted him, finally facing him. "Absolutely nothing, that's the problem." Adrian was confused. "I don't understand." Emma laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "Of course you don't understand. For you, this is all just a game, isn't it? A contract, a business transaction where you get what you need and I receive my payment." "Emma," he began, but she moved away when he tried to approach. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't pretend there's more than this between us. Don't pretend I'm special when we both know I'm just convenient." Adrian felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Who told you that?" "Nobody needed to tell me," Emma lied. "I just woke up to reality." But Adrian knew manipulative women well enough to recognize signs of external interference. It was someone. Who was it? "It doesn't matter." Emma turned to leave the veranda. "Our agreement still stands, but let's keep things in strictly contractual terms, okay?" She disappeared into the apartment, leaving Adrian alone with a feeling of loss that surprised him with its intensity. In recent days, he had grown accustomed to Emma's gentle presence, to her shy smiles, to the way she made him feel more human. Now suddenly, she had become a cold stranger living in the same house. Determined to discover what had happened, Adrian did something he rarely did. He cancelled all his meetings for the day and dedicated himself to investigating. It didn't take long to discover that a blonde, elegant woman had visited Emma's flower shop the day before. The description matched Isabella Winters perfectly. The anger that took hold of him was primitive, visceral. Isabella had crossed a dangerous line by involving Emma in her power games. He knew exactly how his ex-fiancée operated. She identified weaknesses, exploited insecurities, planted seeds of doubt that grew like weeds. That night, Adrian sought out Emma in her room. She was sitting on the bed writing in her notebook, but closed it quickly when he appeared at the door. "I need to talk to you," he said. "It's late," replied Emma without looking at him, "and we have nothing to talk about." "Isabella Winters went to your shop yesterday," Adrian said directly. Emma stiffened but tried to hide it. "I don't know who you're talking about." "My ex-fiancé," he continued, entering the room despite her resistance. "Blonde, tall, probably said horrible things about me and about you. She just clarified some things," murmured Emma. "What things?" Adrian's voice was dangerously low. Emma finally faced him, and there were tears in her eyes that she tried to contain. "That you dated for 5 years, that she was your fiancée until recently, that you desperately sought her out before finding me." Adrian closed his eyes, mentally cursing Isabella. It's true that we dated. It's true that we were engaged. But what? Exploded Emma, getting up from the bed. You used me as a plan. B, when your perfect princess didn't want to play house with you, you found me on the street and thought, here's a desperate idiot who will accept anything. So it wasn't like that, said Adrian, approaching her. Wasn't it? Emma laughed bitterly. Then explain to me, Adrian. Explain how a man who was engaged a few months ago suddenly decides to marry a complete stranger. Explain why you didn't mention your ex-fiancé even once. Explain why I should believe there's any sincerity in any gesture of yours. Adrian was silent for a moment, fighting against decades of conditioning that taught him to guard vulnerabilities like state secrets. But there was something in Emma's hurt eyes that broke his defenses. Isabella left me at the altar, he finally said, his voice hoarse. Literally in the church in front of 300 guests. She said she had realized she didn't love me, that I was too cold, incapable of truly loving. Emma blinked, surprised by the brutal honesty. She was right, continued Adrian. I didn't know how to love. I still don't know if I know how. I was raised to be a money-making machine, not a man capable of feelings. When my grandfather died and left that clause, I sought out Isabella first because it was the easiest path. She knew me, knew my world, and she refused, murmured Emma. She laughed in my face, admitted Adrian, said I had lost my only chance with her, that she would never forgive me for having been an absent, cold fiancé, more interested in business than in our relationship. Emma felt something move inside her, but fought against compassion. And then you found me. And then I found you, he repeated, taking a step toward her. And you were different. You didn't want anything from me beyond what I offered. You didn't try to negotiate more money, didn't make impossible demands, didn't look at me as if I were a prize to be won. I needed the money, said Emma, but her voice was softer. I know, said Adrian, and I needed a wife, but if it were just that... Paused, running a hand through his hair. Emma, if it were just that, I wouldn't spend nights awake thinking about you. I wouldn't come home earlier just to hear your voice. I wouldn't feel as if something were missing when you distance yourself from me. The words hung between them, raw and honest in a way that frightened both. Emma felt her heart beating erratically, divided between the desire to believe and the fear of being deceived again. How do I know this is true? She whispered. How do I know you're not saying what you think I want to hear? Adrian approached, until he was just inches from her, so close that she could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. Because, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, for the first time in my life, I'm afraid. Afraid that you'll disappear. Afraid that this will end. Afraid that I've found something real and don't know how to keep it. And then, before either of them could think about the consequences, Adrian kissed her. It wasn't a chaste kiss like at the wedding, but a desperate one loaded with weeks of repressed tension, painful confessions, a need that went far beyond the physical. Emma resisted for just a second before surrendering, her hands getting lost in his hair, her body molding, against his as if they were made to fit together. And for the first time since Isabella had planted the poison of doubt in her mind, Emma allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, what was being born between them was real. The kiss changed everything. When they finally separated, breathless and with racing hearts, Emma and Adrian looked at each other as if they were seeing each other for the first time. There was a new intimacy in the air, a mutual vulnerability that frightened and excited at the same time. Emma. Adrian murmured, touching her face as if she were made of porcelain. Don't say anything, she whispered, placing her fingers on his lips. Don't ruin this with words. For the first time since they met, they slept in the same bed. They didn't make love. It was too early, too intense, too dangerous, but they spent the night intertwined, discovering each other's geography through innocent caresses that burned like fire. Adrian discovered that Emma had a small scar on her left shoulder, a reminder of a bicycle fall in childhood. Emma discovered that he murmured words in Italian during sleep, fragments of memories from when the Italian nanny sang to him as a child. In the following mornings, cohabitation acquired a new intimacy. Small touches that lingered longer than necessary. Glances that met across the breakfast table and sustained until one of them blushed. Conversations that lasted hours on the veranda, where they discovered unexpected affinities. They both loved classical literature, both Emma and Adrian wrote, she poetry, he reflections in a diary that no one had ever seen. But the fragile happiness that was being born between them didn't go unnoticed by enemies. Isabella Winters hadn't given up. Frustrated that her first attack hadn't resulted in the immediate separation of the couple, she intensified the attacks. She began spreading rumors in San Francisco's most select social circles, insinuating that Adrian's marriage was a farce, that he had married only to meet the clauses of the will. More dangerous still, she began investigating Emma's past obsessively. She hired private investigators to scour every detail of the Mitchell family's life, determined to find something she could use as a weapon. It was on a Saturday morning that the first bomb exploded. Emma was preparing breakfast when her cell phone rang. It was Jake, one of her twin brothers, his voice altered in a way she had never heard. "Emma, you need to come here now," he said, clearly disturbed. "What happened?" Emma's heart raced. "Is it Mom? Is she okay?" "It's not Mom," replied Jake. There's a woman here. She says she knows our dad." Emma almost dropped the phone. "What did you say?" "A blonde woman, well-dressed. She has photos, Emma, photos of Dad, recent ones." Emma's world began to spin. Her father had died when she was 16. At least that's what she had always believed. Her mother, in her moments of lucidity, had always spoken of his death as an established fact, a tragedy that had destroyed the family. "I'm coming," said Emma, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. Adrian, who had heard part of the conversation, approached her with concern. "What happened? My family? There's someone there saying my father is alive," Emma stammered, looking for her keys. "This is impossible. He died years ago." Adrian felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about that situation he didn't like, a smell of manipulation. He knew too well. "I'm going with you." "No," said Emma quickly. "This is my family's problem." But Adrian was already getting the car keys. "Not when it involves my wife." The word wife left his lips with a propriety that surprised them both. It was no longer just a contractual term. It had become something real, meaningful, protective. They arrived at the Mitchell family's simple house to find Isabella Winters sitting in the modest living room, like an exotic queen in an environment she clearly considered inferior. Emma's twin brothers, two 15-year-old youths who were male copies of her, were visibly uncomfortable. "Ah, what a surprise," said Isabella when she saw Adrian. "Brought your husband to a family matter, Emma." "What do you want?" asked Emma directly, ignoring the provocation. Isabella smiled and took a folder from her designer bag. "I want to tell you the truth about your father. Joseph Mitchell didn't die, dear. He ran away." Emma felt her legs weaken. "That's a lie." "Unfortunately, it's not," said Isabella, spreading photos on the center table. They were recent photographs of a man in his 50s, grey hair, features that were unmistakably familiar. "Your father is very much alive, living in rural Oregon, with a new identity and a new family." The photos showed Joseph Mitchell, older, thinner, but definitely him, in everyday situations, leaving a bakery, talking with neighbors, entering a simple house where a woman waited for him at the door. "Why would he run away?" whispered Emma, picking up one of the photos with trembling hands. "Because," said Isabella, savoring each word, "he was being prosecuted for fraud. He diverted money from investors, falsified documents, deceived dozens of families, and when it all came to light, when creditors started collecting, he simply disappeared, left you dealing with the consequences." Adrian observed the scene with growing alarm. There was something familiar about that story, something that touched old and uncomfortable memories. "Who were the investors?" he asked, his voice tense. Isabella turned to him with a venomous smile. "What an interesting question, Adrian. Want to know who was responsible for destroying your dear wife's family?" Emma looked from Isabella to Adrian, a terrible suspicion beginning to take shape in her mind. "Henry Bennett," Isabella finally said. Your late grandfather, Adrian. Joseph Mitchell tried to deceive the Bennett family patriarch and paid the price. The difference is that he fled like a coward, leaving his family to pay for his crimes. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma looked at Adrian as if she were seeing a monster. All the pieces began to fit together in a cruel way. The family's sudden poverty after the father's death, the impossible debts, the desperate struggle to survive. "You knew," said Emma, her voice a broken whisper. "You knew who I was when you proposed marriage." "Emma, no," said Adrian, trying to approach, but she backed away as if he were poisonous. "My God," she laughed, but it was a laugh without humor. "I thought it was fate, that it was coincidence. But you sought me out purposefully. This was... Was it revenge?" "It wasn't revenge," said Adrian desperately. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." But the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. How to explain that he really hadn't deeply investigated her past before the proposal? How to convince her that his feelings were real when everything pointed to a cruel manipulation? Emma got up abruptly, the photos of her father scattered around her feet like shards of glass. "You used me," she said, tears running down her face. "From the very first moment. I was just a way to humiliate my family even more." "Emma, please," begged Adrian. "Let me explain." But she was already running to the door, leaving behind the photos, the lies, and the shattered heart. Isabella watched everything with barely disguised satisfaction, knowing she had planted the seed of destruction that would grow until it consumed any chance of happiness between Adrian and Emma. Adrian stood in the modest living room, surrounded by evidence of the dark past that connected their families, understanding that he had lost the only thing that really mattered in his life. And for the first time, all the money in the world couldn't buy back what he most desired: the love and trust of the woman he had learned to love when it was too late. Emma disappeared like smoke. Adrian spent 3 days looking for her, mobilizing all the resources at his disposal, but it was as if she had evaporated from the face of the earth. The flower shop remained closed. The Mitchell family house was empty, except for the twin brothers, who refused to speak to him, and none of Emma's friends or acquaintances knew where she was. On the third sleepless night, Adrian was in his office drinking whiskey straight from the bottle when his cell phone rang. It was Dr. Castellano, the family lawyer. "Adrian, we need to talk," said the man, his voice tense. "There are serious problems with the will." "What kind of problems?" asked Adrian, though deep down he knew exactly what the problem was. "Ryan Taylor has filed a petition questioning the legitimacy of your marriage. He has photos, testimonies, evidence that you and your wife are living separately, and now she has simply disappeared." Adrian closed his eyes. "How much time do I have?" "The judge has scheduled a hearing for Monday. If you can't prove the marriage is real and that you're living as husband and wife, you'll lose everything." 4 days. Adrian had 4 days to find Emma and convince her to return, or he would lose not only the empire he had built, but also the only woman who had managed to break the walls around his heart. Meanwhile, Emma was hiding in a small hotel in Carmel, 2 hours from San Francisco. She had fled there on impulse, remembering a trip she had taken with her parents as a child, before everything collapsed. The place was simple, discreet, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear from the world. She spent the days walking the streets of the seaside town, trying to organize her thoughts and deal with the pain that consumed her from within. The betrayal she felt wasn't just about the money or the contract. It was about having opened up, having allowed herself to dream, having believed that a man like Adrian Bennett could genuinely be interested in someone like her. Even worse was the discovery about her father. Joseph Mitchell was alive, living. A new life while his family suffered the consequences of his crimes. Emma felt orphaned twice, first when she thought he had died, now knowing that he had simply abandoned everyone he loved. On the 4th day, when she was returning from a walk, late in the afternoon, Emma found Adrian waiting in the hotel reception. He was disheveled with deep dark circles under his eyes, wearing the same clothes as the day before. He looked like a man on the verge of collapse. "How did you find me?" she asked, stopping on the stairs. "You mentioned once that you came here as a child," he said, standing up. "I searched every hotel in town." "We have nothing to talk about," said Emma, trying to pass by him. "Emma, please," Adrian gently held her arm. "5 minutes, that's all I ask." There was a desperation in his voice that she had never heard before. Against her better judgment, Emma agreed to listen to him in the small hotel cafe. "I didn't know," said Adrian as soon as they sat down. "I swear by my parents' memory that I didn't know about the connection between your father and my grandfather." "How do you expect me to believe that?" asked Emma, her voice cold. "Because if I had known, I would never have approached you," he replied honestly. "If I had known you were the daughter of someone my grandfather had persecuted, I would have run away. Not because I don't care about you, but because I care too much." Emma remained silent, studying his face. There was something in the raw sincerity of his words that made her hesitate. "My grandfather was a ruthless man," continued Adrian. "He destroyed many people throughout his life. I spent years trying to fix some of the damage he caused, but I never managed to correct everything. And now to discover that the woman I love is the daughter of one of his victims." He paused, running his hands over his face. "It's as if the universe were punishing me for all the sins of my family." "The woman you love," Emma repeated, focusing on the words he had said almost without realizing. Adrian looked her in the eyes. "Yes, I love you, Emma. I know I have no right, I know our story started all wrong, but I love you. And not just because you're beautiful or kind or because you cook for me. I love you because when I'm with you, I'm the best version of myself. Because you make me want to be a better man." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. "How can I believe you? How can I be sure this isn't just more manipulation?" "Because," said Adrian, taking an envelope from his pocket, "I'm willing to give up everything for you." Emma opened the envelope and found legal documents. "What is this?" "A formal renunciation of the inheritance," explained Adrian. "If you sign this with me, I abdicate all the Bennett fortune. We lose the money you received for the marriage. We lose everything, but we start from scratch. Clean." Emma looked at the papers with disbelief. "You're willing to give up billions of dollars? For you?" "Without hesitation," he replied. "Money I can earn again. You're irreplaceable." It was at that moment that Emma realized his sincerity. No man would give up so much power and wealth for a manipulation. But there were still wounds that needed to heal. "And my father," she asked, "how to deal with the fact that your family destroyed mine?" "We find him," said Adrian. "We confront the past. We discover the complete truth, and then we decide if we can build a future despite everything." Emma was silent for long minutes, her heart at war with reason. Finally, she raised her eyes to meet his. "If we do this," she said slowly, "if we go back together, it has to be real. There can be no more secrets, more lies, more games." "Never again," promised Adrian, extending his hand to her. Emma looked at the outstretched hand, knowing that if she touched it, she would be making a decision that would change the rest of her life. She could run away, disappear forever, keep herself safe but alone. Or she could bet on love, even knowing she could get hurt again. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. "Then let's go back," she said, "and let's face all this together." When they left the hotel hand in hand, neither Emma nor Adrian knew that Isabella Winters had hired a photographer to follow them. The images of the romantic reunion in Carmel would be used against them at Monday's hearing, as proof that they had staged a reconciliation to deceive justice. The battle for their love was just beginning, and the enemies did not intend to make victory easy. The hearing on Monday was a brutal spectacle. The courtroom was full of journalists, curious businessmen and investors, anxious to know the fate of the Bennett empire. Adrian and Emma entered hand in hand, presenting a united front, but both knew they were about to face the greatest challenge of their lives. Ryan Taylor had built an impressive case. He presented photos of Emma and Adrian in moments of coldness, testimonies from employees attesting that they slept in separate rooms, financial records showing the exorbitant amount transferred to Emma's account right after the wedding. But the most powerful weapon in his arsenal was Isabella Winters. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, elegant in a white suit that made her look like an avenging angel, "I dated Adrian Bennett for 5 years. I know this man better than anyone in this room, and I can categorically state that he is incapable of truly loving." Her words echoed through the courtroom like sharp blades. "Adrian Bennett marries only for convenience. He desperately sought me out when he learned of the clauses in the will, offering fortunes for me to return. When I refused, he found the first vulnerable woman willing to accept his proposal." Emma felt each word like a punch to the stomach, but Adrian squeezed her hand, giving her strength. "And as final proof," continued Isabella, "I present these photographs taken just 4 days ago in Carmel. The images appeared on a giant screen, Adrian and Emma reuniting at the hotel, talking in the cafe, leaving hand in hand. To any observer, it looked like a rehearsed reconciliation." "They spent 4 days apart," said Isabella triumphantly, "because they fought when the truth about the past of their families came to light. This convenient reconciliation happened only when they realized the hearing was scheduled." Adrian's lawyer stood up for the defense, but before he could speak, Emma rose. "May I speak in my own defense?" she asked the judge. There were surprised murmurs in the audience. No one expected the humble florist to have the courage to address the court. "It's true that I married Adrian for money," said Emma, her voice clear, echoing through the room. "It's true that I was desperate, that my family needed help, that I saw in him a solution to our problems." Adrian looked at her alarmed. Where was she going with this? "It's also true that I discovered our families had a dark past connected," continued Emma, "that Adrian's grandfather had persecuted my father, that our marriage seemed a cruel irony of fate." Isabella smiled, thinking Emma was confirming everything she had said. "But what is not true," said Emma, her voice gaining strength, "is that Adrian Bennett is incapable of loving, because I saw this man cry when he thought he had lost me. I saw him willing to give up his entire fortune just to prove his feelings were sincere. I saw him take care of me when I was sick, protect me when I felt threatened, respect me even, when we had just a contract between us." She turned to face Isabella directly. "You say you know Adrian better than anyone. Then tell me, what is the recurring nightmare that wakes him at 3 in the morning? What song does he hum when he thinks no one is listening? Why does he keep a photo of his parents in his wallet but never shows it to anyone?" Isabella paled, clearly not knowing the answers. "I know all these things," said Emma softly, "because when you truly love someone, you pay attention. You observe, you care about the details that make that person unique." She turned to the judge. "Our marriage may have started as a contract, but it transformed into something real. And if that's not enough to prove we're a legitimate couple, then maybe it's better to lose the inheritance anyway." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the journalists had stopped scribbling in their notebooks, absorbed in Emma's raw confession. It was then that the back doors opened with a bang. A man in his 50s entered. Grey hair, face marked by time and remorse. Emma felt her blood freeze when she recognized the father she believed to be dead. "Joseph Mitchell," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "My daughter," said Joseph, walking down the central aisle as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It's time for me to tell the truth about what really happened between me and Henry Bennett." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged the gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Joseph addressed the center of the room, ignoring the cameras and flashes. "I am not a victim of the Bennett family," he said clearly. "I am the criminal that Henry Bennett exposed." Emma felt the world spin. "Dad, I stole money from innocent investors, my daughter. I falsified documents, lied, deceived hard-working families. And when Henry Bennett discovered my crimes and threatened me with prison, I fled like a coward, leaving you to pay for my mistakes." Tears were running down Emma's face. Adrian stood up and enveloped her with his arms, being her anchor in a storm of emotions. "I came here today," continued Joseph, "because I learned that my daughter was being used in a battle that is not hers, and because I need to publicly ask for forgiveness, to my family, to the people I stole from, and especially to the Bennett family, whose reputation was stained by my lies." He turned to Emma and Adrian. My daughter married the grandson of the man who tried to make me pay for my crimes. This is not revenge of fate, it's redemption. It's the chance for two shattered families to find healing through love. Ryan Taylor was visibly desperate. His case was crumbling before his eyes. This doesn't prove anything about the marriage, he shouted. It's still a marriage of convenience. You're right, said Adrian, standing up and surprising everyone. It is a marriage of convenience. Convenient because I found the perfect woman for me. Convenient because she makes me want to be a better man. Convenient because for the first time in my life I understand what it means to have a family. He knelt right there in the middle of the courtroom, taking a ring from his pocket, not the simple band from the civil wedding, but a dazzling solitaire he had bought in the hope of a moment like this. Emma Mitchell Bennett, he said, his voice broken with emotion, will you marry me again? This time not for money, not for contracts, but for love. Do you want to build a life with me, knowing the whole truth about our past? Emma looked at the man kneeling before her, at the father who had resurfaced from the past to fix his mistakes, at the courtroom full of people waiting for her answer, and she realized that, despite all the secrets, all the pain, all the complications, she had found something she believed didn't exist, a true and transformative love. Yes, she said, extending her trembling hand, 1,000 times yes. When Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, the courtroom erupted in applause. Even the judge was smiling, clearly moved by the dramatic turn of events. Isabella Winters left the courtroom like a storm, defeated and humiliated. Ryan Taylor still tried to appeal the decision, but his case had become indefensible. The Bennett empire was saved. But more important than that, Adrian and Emma had found something much more valuable than any fortune. They had found each other, and nothing or no one could take that away from them. 6 months after the hearing that changed their lives, Adrian and Emma married again. This time it was an intimate ceremony in the garden that Adrian had commissioned on the penthouse terrace, a garden that Emma had helped design with thousands of flowers that told their love story in colors and scents. Emma's mother, on May, one of her most lucid days, blessed the union with tears in her eyes. The twin brothers, now 16 and studying at one of the best private schools in San Francisco, served as best men. And Joseph Mitchell, who had spent the last few months working tirelessly to repair the damage he had caused, walked his daughter down the aisle with a mixture of pride and redemption stamped on his face. Adrian had changed profoundly. The cold, calculating man gave way to someone who smiled easily, who hugged Emma in the kitchen while she cooked, who spent entire Sundays playing video games with his teenage brothers-in-law. He discovered that wealth had a different flavor when shared with people he loved. Emma, in turn, blossomed in a way that surprised even herself. Shyness gave way to serene confidence, and she took an active role in managing the family fortune, directing investments to social causes that touched her heart. They created a foundation that helped families in situations similar to what she had experienced, and Emma became one of the most respected voices in the nonprofit sector in San Francisco. The Flower Shop, which had been the starting point of everything, was transformed into something magical. Adrian bought the entire building and expanded the business, but maintained the simple and welcoming essence that Emma loved so much. Now it was a distribution center for flowers to hospitals, nursing homes, and public schools in the city, bringing beauty and hope to places where they were most needed. Joseph spent months in a recovery clinic, not just treating the depression that had consumed him during the years of flight, but also confronting the demons that had led him to the crimes of the past. When he came out, he was a different man, determined to spend the rest of his life repairing the damage he had caused. He worked side by side with Emma and Adrian to identify and compensate the families he had harmed, using part of the Bennett fortune for this purpose. The reconciliation between father and daughter was slow and painful but true. Emma learned to separate the man she loved in childhood from the criminal he had become, and Joseph learned that redemption was not a destination, but a daily journey of better choices. Isabella Winters disappeared from San Francisco's social circles after the public humiliation in court. Some said she had moved abroad, others that she had married a businessman of lesser prominence. Adrian and Emma rarely thought about her, too busy building their own happiness to care about who had tried to destroy it. Ryan Taylor tried for a few more months to create legal problems for the couple, but his attacks became increasingly desperate and fruitless. Eventually he gave up and turned his attention to other businesses, discovering that some battles simply weren't worth fighting. It was on a spring afternoon, exactly 1 year after their first meeting on the Chinatown sidewalk, that Emma discovered she was pregnant. She told Adrian in the same simple and direct way that characterized all important moments between them. During dinner, between one bite and another, as if announcing that it had rained that day. Adrian dropped his fork on the plate, his eyes filling with tears he didn't try to hide. "Really?" was all he could say. "Really?" confirmed Emma, smiling through her own tears. That night, lying on the veranda under the stars of San Francisco, they talked about the future that was growing inside Emma. They would tell their child about the difficulties they had faced, about the mistakes of the past, about how true love always finds a way even through the most unlikely circumstances. "Do you think we'll be good parents?" asked Adrian, caressing Emma's still flat belly. "I think we'll try to be better than our parents were," she replied, "and that's already a good start." 3 years later, the garden on the terrace had expanded even more. Helena Bennett, a 2-year-old girl with her father's dark eyes and her mother's sweet smile, ran among the flowers while Emma followed her, 6 months pregnant with their second child. Adrian watched the 2 women of his life playing in the garden that had become the heart of their home, and knew that he had found something that no inheritance, no fortune, no empire could buy: a true family. Joseph, now a dedicated grandfather who had found in his granddaughter the final motivation for his redemption, arrived for the Sunday lunch carrying a bouquet of white roses, the same ones that Emma had dropped on the sidewalk on that fateful day. "What are these for?" asked Emma, receiving the flowers with a smile. "To remember that sometimes the best things in life are born from our most difficult moments," replied Joseph, kissing his daughter's forehead. Adrian approached and embraced Emma from behind, his hands resting protectively over her belly. He thought about the cruel clause in the will that had almost destroyed him, but which, in the end, had led him to the greatest treasure of his life. He thought about the ruthless grandfather who never knew true love, and how that had shaped generations of Bennett men for solitude and coldness. The chain had been broken. Helena would grow up knowing she was unconditionally loved. The baby about to be born would be received with joy and tenderness. And perhaps in the next generations, the Bennett family would be remembered not for the money it accumulated or the power it wielded, but for the love it knew how to cultivate. As the sun set over San Francisco, tinting the sky with golden hues that reflected in the flowering garden, Emma leaned against Adrian's chest and felt the deep peace of someone who had found her place in the world. She had started as a flower seller, struggling to survive. Now she was a woman who had discovered that true love was like a seed. It could be planted in the most unlikely soil and still flourish in all its glory. "I love you," whispered Adrian in her ear, words he never tired of saying, and that she never tired of hearing. "I love you too," replied Emma, turning to kiss him while Helena laughed among the flowers, and the future unfolded before them like an infinite garden of possibilities. In the end, they discovered that true wealth wasn't in the billions of the Bennett inheritance, but in the ability to transform pain into love, loneliness into family, and cold contracts into eternal promises. And like all the best love stories, theirs proved that when two right